Who taught you to hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Most of us blacks, or Negroes as he called us, really thought we were free without being aware that in our subconscious, all those chains we thought had been struck off were still there. And there were many ways where what really motivated us was our desire to be loved by the white man. Malcolm meant to lance that sense of inferiority. He knew it would be painful. He knew that people could kill you because of it, but he dared to take that risk.
He was saying something over and above that of any other leader of that day. While the other leaders were begging for entry into the house of their oppressor, he was telling you to build your own house.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. We have today a guest that's well renowned in our community, Herb Boyd. And what is it that Herb doesn't do? I mean, author, reporter, extraordinaire. I mean, he's a good friend, and I'm sure you can relate to what Malcolm just said.
Oh, indeed.
We go back to a time in our history when that self-esteem issue was so prevalent amongst us all.
No
We
doubt
didn't think
about
we were
it.
possible to do anything. You know, we had the 50s where, you know, Sidney Poitier touched a white girl, and what? You know, it was a big issue. And now today we sit with a black president. Now, I'm 72, so I'm sure you're somewhere in that category.
Right together,
So our self-esteem has risen to such a height, but our kids are showing their drawers. What's the state of black America today?
Yes. Well, I think one of the things about it, we certainly should applaud, and as we pay homage to the past, you know, we understand exactly where we are.
Right.
And of course, Obama, the whole situation with him, and he's acknowledged himself finally that he stands on the shoulders
Amen.
of all of these individuals. Certainly, if you read Dreams from My Father, his first book, you can see the kind of shout out that he does for Malcolm X in that book. You know, we talked about Malcolm's power, both as an orator and a leader. So it's good that you make those connections, and I think from a historical standpoint, the work you've been doing here is significantly in that direction. How we begin to understand the present by, it's like the Sankofa thing, you know, the Sankofa bird, you know, kind of faces forward, but he looks back.
Always.
And we kind of make those connections, and I think it's important that, you know, our young people in particular, they have to be carefully taught. They have to be really carefully taught, and we're concerned about their survival, their livelihood, and many of them are running out into this here very, very turmoil society and chaos that we live, and they're not armed with the proper information and survival skills. So, you know, we have that responsibility of inculcating them with that understanding of what you should say, how you conduct yourself, the whole behavior, particularly when you're being confronted, you know, by the enemy as such, and certainly by a police force that is so trigger happy. And one little wrong move, and you could become a fatality.
we stand on the shoulders. We go through 3 generations. We're the grandparents of most of these kids. And the subject matter today, Malcolm X's grandson.
Yes.
And everybody's curious of what happened. But let's go into a little bit of his history. And with that, I just want to show this one take on Betty Shabazz and how she passed.
Yes.
So would you run that clip on the first clip that we have, the roll in? And this is Malcolm on his grandmother.
Yes.
And how it happened.
Your grandmother, Mama Betty Shabazz, was she killed by a grandchild
Yes.
who set a fire?
Yes.
What's the truth?
This is actually me. This was me. When I was 12 years old, my mother, she was facing a case against the federal government for allegedly hiring a hitman to assassinate Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan. And, you know, it was highly publicized. And me, I was bouncing around from family member, family friend. There was no real consistency or stability in my life at this time. I didn't know where I'd be laying my head from one day to the next. I was worried about my mom. I was stressed. I was sad. You know, I had an ulcer. And what happened is I began to act out. You know, I began to act out in order to be mischievous because I wanted to be sent to my mom, me not realizing what my mother was going through with this case, and I couldn't be with her. So I began to steal cars. I began to steal money. I used to run away from home, anything for my family to take the position, this boy is out of control, send him back to his mom. This was my logic. And one of the last things that I did, you know, was set a fire. And when I set this fire, it was my intention to be mischievous. It was my intention to be mischievous, but it was not my intent for anyone to get hurt, especially, you know, my grandmother. And, you know, when I set this fire, I believe that my grandmother, she didn't know I set it, and she probably thought that it was an attack against the home. You know, because my family has a history of our homes being firebombed. So, you know, she was a really strong woman. And what she did, you know, which was totally unexpected, is that she actually ran through the fire to try to save me. And, you know, over 90% of her body was burned. And about a month later, she passed away. And, you know, when this first happened, you know, I didn't know how to deal with myself or anybody. You know, I was very antisocial. And I just didn't forgive myself. You know, I didn't talk. I was 12. Yeah. So, you know, but yeah, that's basically what happened. And you know, for anyone to lose a grandmother, yeah, that hurts. But I lost my grandmother due to my own careless and reckless actions. You know, so it's something that I ask for forgiveness for, and I continue to ask for forgiveness for it, and I always ask for forgiveness for it. You know.
Fighting this legacy and not fighting in sort of for attention. For attention.
Yes. See, but not a young child who at that stage did not know the history
right
of the family, of his grandfather's death, the implications that were made against Louis Farrakhan with regard to his death, what his mother and grandmother and his aunt had been through following the shooting of Malcolm.
Yes.
And evidently, nobody took the time to sit down with him and give him his family history.
Yes.
And I have seen this in so many kids. You know, when I was in the police department, first thing we would ask a kid when we brought him in after we arrest him, can you read? Oh, yeah, I can read. Well, read this. Well, why do I have to read it?
Right.
I just want to know if you can read.
Right.
Yes. Either you can or you can't.
So many people.
My grandfather never learned how to read.
Right.
He died not knowing how to read and never voting in his life, and he had dozens of grandchildren. I just want to know if you know how to read. And one young fella, he was 16, facing 7 years in state prison, which he did at age 16. And the point I'm getting to is this. We had a book in the office, and it was on the victims of the civil rights era and how none of the cases were ever solved. The murders of black people.
Cold cases.
And he sat there and read that book in the cell and was crying. He said, I never knew any of this. So our children are not being given the history. And in Malcolm's case, he never got the family history.
Right.
As profound a man as his grandfather was, he didn't have that information.
So he wound up spending, what, 4 years in prison for that?
Exactly. Well, one of the things about that, Graham, you're absolutely right, and even more so in a family that has experienced so much trauma.
Yeah.
I think it's a tendency to shut down, to cut your way, to move away from that.
Yeah.
Trying to push it aside, trying to forget it.
Yeah.
You try to forget it.
Yeah.
I know Betty kind of put her arms around her daughters, and to shield them, because there was so much information coming, misinformation and stuff like that. So at some point you just shut down, say no, and not even discuss anything to do with such a tragic experience. Who wants to be reminded, and talking about it a lot? So that's one of the ways. Exactly, that's one of the ways you kind of don't get a chance to come together as a family to discuss not only that, but let's go back another generation.
Yeah.
Malcolm's father.
Oh God. Marcus Garvey,
who was brutally taken from us. The Ku Klux Klan or the Black Legion, as he talked about it. So it's like the third generation of tragedy for that family.
Yeah, heavy.
And I can understand it to some degree. And I'm very close to Ilyasa, in fact, and Malak. And in fact, I'm working on a book now with Ilyasa in terms of the diary of Malcolm X. And maybe the next time I come on the show, we can talk about something a little bit more uplifting.
Well, we'll do that.
Oh, yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right, Graham, in terms of, and we have that importance of preparing our children.
Right.
Because it's to be forearmed. When you're armed with that kind of information, you're going out into the world, then people cannot misguide or mislead or mischaracterize things for you, because you've been schooled and well-grounded in the family and your people's history. Right. And I mean, I have kids, I teach at City College, and I have kids coming in there, and they're just absolutely bereft of any African-American history. Maybe they had one class here, they may have heard Booker T. Washington's name or Jackie Robinson, but that'd be the extent of it. They don't know anything about the history and culture.
Martin Luther King, maybe?
Maybe, well, Dr. King and Malcolm X is something, but if you start going back and trying to understand who Frederick Douglass is. I have some of my students who think I knew Frederick Douglass. I mean, but that's understandable in the sense, maybe perhaps because I can talk about it so intimately and so personally. You can bring a certain kind of passion to that. They figure that, God, you're talking about this guy like you know.
Or Dr. Clark.
Dr. John Henry Clark, and just to catch a glimpse of him there. And of course, he was our mentor.
Right.
He taught all of us.
That's right.
And so we have that advantage of kind of passing information on because we studied under these giants. We were alive and young when they were alive and young, and they had picked up that information when many of them were autodidacts. It was self-taught. Because they didn't go to anybody's school necessarily and pick up that kind of information. But they had, as Graham suggests, they had to read.
Well, when Malcolm was alive in the 60s, I mean, were you eating pork? You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
Sherman's, I mean, we're going to Sherman.
Well, I knew him when I was 19 in Detroit.
Oh, wow, okay.
Right. You know, I was in the Nation of Islam in Detroit.
Oh, that's right, that's right, that's right. Okay.
I saw Malcolm very early, whenever he came to town.
Okay.
By the time I really got into it, he was moving on a national and international circuit. And but time to time, he'd come back because his family was there.
Okay.
And Wilford later on became the minister there at the mosque. That was always like number one. Was in Detroit.
Right.
Because that's where Elijah Muhammad was.
Right.
In the beginning, in Black Bottom, Detroit, and then ultimately in Chicago.
Right.
So I always had those advantages growing up in a highly politicized very radical, militant, the labor union, all of those things. In fact, we had a forum this weekend down at Pace University, the Left Forum, and it was an opportunity to ground with a lot of my brothers I hadn't seen in years, you know, and to talk about some of the labor movements, the labor struggles we had out there. The Republic of New Africa was founded right at Wayne State University, where I taught for 15 years. And they just recently, Chokwe Lumumba? Yeah. It was one of my students back in the day.
Your student?
And Chokwe is now the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. I sent him an email congratulating him.
That must be a real...
And I mean, so you start seeing how these things are connected, from Harlem to Detroit to Africa. To Africa.
Did you travel with Clark?
Oh, never traveled with Dr. Clark.
But Dr. Ben?
Dr. Ben either, you know. I traveled alone when I went to Egypt, but I did travel with Kwame Ture on a couple of occasions, Stokely Carmichael. But that was to Libya and then to Egypt. And into the Middle East too. We went to the Middle East. We went to Palestine. We met with Yasser Arafat. You know, I had that opportunity, and I was just reading today's Final Call, and Conrad Worrell, Dr. Worrell, has a nice piece, a reflection on the life of Kwame Ture. And there's a book coming out. Dr. Peniel Joseph is coming out with his biography of Kwame Ture. You know, I've had a chance to read it already, and it's a fantastic study.
Tell me about Kwame. He had an evolution too, didn't he?
See, that's what happens is that whole reading process, Graham, because if you have a Marcus Garvey, who was reading Booker T. Washington.
Right. Early 1900s, that's right.
You know, he was reading Up From Slavery when he was down in Kingston. And then
and Kingston, that's right. He wanted to come up to to meet Booker T.
He communicated with Booker T.
Booker T. died just before he got here?
A year before.
A year before. That's right.
A year before. So he never had a chance to personally hook up with him, but they exchanged a series of letters. Matter of fact, the last letter was where I guess Marcus hit on him for a ticket. Can I come up there? And of course, Booker T. Washington ain't in a position to give you a ticket. But if you get up here, I will greet and warmly welcome you.
He was how old when he got here?
Marcus when he died?
When he got here.
When he got here, you figured that he was born in 1887. And he got here in 1916. So he was still a relatively young man,
20 years
when he arrived
1920.
here. And then he traveled all over the country. But the point is that if you have a Garvey, he left behind, his book was Philosophy and Opinions. Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah reads Garvey's Philosophy and Opinions. Then Kwame Ture, you know, he comes along and he reads Kwame Nkrumah. So you have this here kind of connections from Kwame Nkrumah to Kwame Ture to Marcus Garvey to Booker T. Washington. And of course in there is Elijah Muhammad in terms of do for self. Because that's where Booker T. Washington was coming from, you know, self-determination, self-reliance. So it's interesting how you can make, and you can just look at about 3 or 4 individuals and their life stories, and you have the full sweep of African-American history.
And Malcolm coming out of...
Malcolm is a key autobiography for the modern period. Because before that, of course, you have, like, you can take Du Bois. Du Bois lived 95 years. He was connected he was connected with every major milestone in American history. Nothing went down from his 20s when he got his PhD from Harvard University. That began his career.
Through the Renaissance.
Through all of that.
The music, the art, the literature,
no matter what subject area, no matter what political formation or movement,
even the Niagara movement,
the NAACP, he died a communist in Ghana. So you just study his life, is 100 years of history right there. And add Frederick Douglass onto that, add Booker T. Washington onto that, and then put Malcolm on the other end. If you want to throw some women in there, fine. You can throw in Ida B. Wells, Harriet Tubman, and Zora Neale Hurston.
Okay.
And then bring it down to the modern period like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Rosa Parks.
What women do we have today?
I mean, that collection of voices. In fact, I did a book called The Autobiography of a People. It was an attempt to collect all those voices and connect them from one generation to another.
Okay.
It's almost like they're finishing each other's sentences as they move across the whole spectrum of American history.
Rosa Parks was working on a book. Let me get this right. Connecting the sexual violations of women, of black women.
Rosa Parks.
By white men. A man she worked with tried to rape her.
Right.
And as did a case with, I believe, Ida B. Wells. There were a number of women that she had interviewed and gathered historical information on. And all of them had been either violated or there was an attempt to sexually violate these women. All well-known women of the struggle.
Oh, wow.
And it was an aspect of her development that was kept quiet. You know?
That's a slavery experience.
But there was the common thread of the overseer.
That's interesting, Graham, because we know today in my classroom, I showed my students, the class I teach in the summer is called Economic Development of Black Community. And I showed them 10,000 men named George. This is A. Philip Randolph and the whole Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. That union he developed beginning in 1925 and it finally was taken in by the AFL by 1937. But and I'm showing them this film, and then I'm giving them kind of some background and contextualize it, because C.L. Dellums, Ron Dellums' father, was a sleeping car porter. Malcolm X was a sleeping car porter.
Yeah, right.
He sold sandwiches, right? Milton Webster.
Well, that was the best job to get.
Ashley Taunton. And most, in connecting up with Graham's point, E.D. Nixon, who was a president of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP. Rosa Parks was his secretary. That was his secretary. Rosa had been compiling information on how blacks had been assaulted by these Night Riders, Ku Klux Klan, and Legion, Black Legion, across the state of Alabama. She had put together a dossier, a cabinet full of these case histories. Somebody broke into the building where she kept all these things and destroyed the whole file. This was part of that work that she was doing, Graham, in terms of documenting these assaults on black women, but not only on black women, but on black people. So all of that work she had done, and that begins to dispel the notion that she was this mild-mannered school mom,
She carried a gun,
going.
You know. She carried a gun. Rosa Parks carried a gun. Matter of fact, let me tell you.
That's funny.
I remember Reverend Dr. The city, there are many places. Bethany Baptist Church.
At Bethany? Me Jones? William Jones.
Bill Jones. He was a lieutenant with Martin Luther King. He carried a gun. I remember him talking about they were in their Cicero or somewhere where it was crazy. And he said, I wasn't closing my eyes. I wanted to see where it was coming from. And he was with Martin. But push come to shove, he was packing, and it would have been something to see how Bill Jones would have responded. You know, it wasn't like when we were walking with Reverend Sharpton down at Bay Ridge. Everybody knew we were packing, and everybody knew what we were there for. But this is a reverend who's packing, and he's walking with the prince, a prince of peace.
Yeah.
And God forbid, you know, one of your lieutenants whips out a .38 and caps somebody.
Well.
But people were not, Negroes were not the sheepish people that people think they were. They weren't.
Reverend Kenyatta tells a story about him and Malcolm going to the airport, and there was
in Chicago.
In Chicago. You
Yeah,
know that story?
right. I heard another story.
and Kenyatta had a
Kenyatta
piece,
was
and Malcolm,
ready. He was
Malcolm said, "What are you doing with a gun?" Said, "If I have a gun, you wouldn't be alive."
That's right. Exactly.
So the sheepishness, you know, that's how I got to know Malcolm, through Reverend Kenyatta.
Yes.
His personal bodyguard.
Oh, brother.
Yeah.
He was very, very close to Malcolm. I had a chance to ground with him on a personal basis because he was a member of White Rock Baptist Church.
Right.
And the pastor there, Vincent Cooper, was my student when I taught at the College of New Rochelle.
Wow.
So I would go through to see Vincent sometime, and he'd make sure, Mr. Kenyatta, and I said, I go all the way back with him. I remember the Mama and everything. You dig it? But the Deacons for Defense, you're talking about bearing arms. Can't forget them, can we?
Right.
The Deacons for Defense. And that was kind of like the military arm of the whole civil rights movement.
That was necessary.
And it's a very good book out. It looks at history. I mean, it's something like one of those untold stories. We need to know a lot more about them, but there's so many of our stories that need to be told. I mean, beyond the kind of Hollywood approach in terms of the Django Unchained or Spielberg's Lincoln, but those can be teaching moments. We can take even the worst crap they throw at us and take those lemons and turn it into lemonade.
Right.
We can take those kind of like mischaracterizations and set the record straight. We take advantage of them putting that stuff out there and put a corrected perspective on it. And I think we have that responsibility. I do it all the time, you know. I mean, it's so none of that stuff is disposable as far as I'm concerned. All of it can be used. You can just take a negative like that and turn it into a positive. I think that's what young Malcolm was trying to do with his life. I think he was making some tremendous strides. I think what Imam Talib Abdul Rashid had to say at the memorial services that we were all together. You know, and he said that he was an emerging light. An emerging light. He was beginning to turn his life around in a very, very productive and progressive way. Because you understand where he's coming from. He could stand up there in that bookstore and actually talk about that situation.
Whoa. That's heavy.
Whoa.
That's heavy.
You know, I mean, you must have the feeling that, I mean, how do you feel? You set a fire to
your grandmother.
Soon your grandmother.
Oh,
do you ever really get past that?
You don't.
You don't? I don't think so. I mean, the whole psychological aspects of it. Of course, I'm in no position to talk about any of that, but I would know that I would be forever living with that particular image. Would be hard for me to get by that. So you have to take that in consideration in terms of everything that he was doing, but he had his grandfather also in view. And I think he was trying to emulate his grandfather. You can see those travels that he was making in the last stages of his life.
He went to
Iran,
all over the Syria. Place. He was going
talking about going to Iran. I mean, where you going to Iran for war back? Come on. They had been to Syria and it made the Hajj to Mecca.
All right, let's go to the memorial.
Sure.
I got a little short piece, and since we're honoring Malcolm Latif Shabazz, let's go to the last roll-in, and we'll come back after that.
Did you ever talk to Brother Malcolm? Did you ever touch him or have him smile at you? Did you ever really listen to him? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance? For if you did, you would know him. And if you knew him, you would know why we must honor him. Malcolm was our manhood, our living black manhood.
And we know, Mr. Shabazz, the brutal killing of Trayvon Martin recently in the US, and that gave a lot of cause for people to take out to the streets to protest because of similar instances involving teenage African Americans who were murdered by white men or security forces or police. Basically, do you think that this is the beginning, the start of a popular movement, a growing popular movement in the US against racism? Do you see that happening in the US?
I mean, well, this isn't anything that's new with the Trayvon Martin case. You know, my heart goes out to him and his family. May Allah have mercy upon his soul. But this isn't anything that's new. And this isn't an isolated incident. There are hundreds of Trayvon Martin incidences that are taking place all throughout the country. But many times, the mainstream media here within the United States, they keep these issues localized, and they don't report it to the rest of the public. So they make it seem as if when an incident like this happens, it only happens within your own community. Many people in Florida or the East Coast might be familiar with Trayvon Martin. They might not be familiar with Oscar Grant in Oakland, California, who was murdered on the BART station with his handcuffs behind his back. He was handcuffed behind his back and they murdered him. They might not be familiar with Kenneth Harding in Texas. And those in Texas familiar with Kenneth Harding might not be familiar with the imam who was murdered by the federal government in Michigan. Those in Michigan familiar with that case might not be familiar with Bell, Louima, or Diallo in New York. You had Bell, he was coming home from a bachelor party. Him and his friends, they got in the car, they were unarmed. The police converged on the vehicle and let off 40-something shots. One officer emptied his clip, reloaded, and continued to shoot. You had another brother, they stuck a plunger up his rectum. The police didn't do any time, they got off. You had another brother, he was an African immigrant here in New York. And the police had stopped him. He went in his pocket to get his wallet. They shot him 27 times. When he was on the ground, they continued to shoot. So the Trayvon Martin incident, the Oscar Grant incident, these incidences are not isolated incidences. There are hundreds of black men that are being murdered all over the United States of America every year, with impunity. And the police officers, they serve no time. They always get off.
Well, the US prison population, Mr. Shabazz, stands at 2.3 million people, which is the largest worldwide. However, black males, which represent the largest percentage, about 40% of the population, they form only 12% of the national population. A black male is 7 times more likely to be imprisoned than a white male. That's according to estimates. Why are so many African Americans in prison, and what's the underlying reason for this situation?
I mean, it's a continuation of institutionalized racism. See, what happened, they didn't have so many prisons here in the United States during slavery. And when they so-called abolished slavery, that's when they came up with this prison industrial complex. The United States has more people incarcerated than anywhere else in the world. It has more people incarcerated than China. And China has the most people in the world. Matter of fact, if you were to take the prison population of all the other countries of the world and you were to combine them together, I don't think it would equal the amount of people who are incarcerated here in the United States of America. It's correct. The so-called African American makes up less than 12% of the population of the United States. Yet no matter what state you go to, you'll see that the majority of the prisoners within the prison population, the majority of them are black and Hispanic. And in these institutions, people are forced to work for pennies on the dollar. If you look at the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, it says that slavery is abolished except for those who serve within these penal institutions. So technically, by the book, those who are in prison are considered to be slaves, and that's why they can be forced to work for a minimum wage, which is less than the minimum wage here in the United States.
Said that she could have freed a lot more slaves if only they realized that they were slaves. This means that during the times of invisible slavery with chains, shackles, and whips, brothers couldn't be convinced to flee from that plantation due to their thorough indoctrination, because bondage was all that they knew. And this is something that extends up until today, where brothers walk around as slaves and actually think that they are free, thinking that stray dog that you see out on the street, if you try to approach it, they either snap at you or try to flee because it doesn't know you. Yet if you're able to subdue that dog, Just don't let us get you down. Things are moving fast. Hold on tight and you will last. Keep your self-respect, your manly pride. Get yourself in gear, keep your stride. Live on your brighter days will soon be here. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free. Yeah. Keep on walking tall. Hold your head up high. Lay your dreams right up to the sky. Sing your praise song, and you'll keep growing, growing on. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free. Hey, just wait and see, someday we'll all be free. Yeah. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free. And won't we all take it from me, someday we'll all be free. Take it from me,
Interesting. So we go from the 12-year-old to the memorial and
28-year-old.
28-year-old, just about to, what? He's just started. He just got started. So what happened in Mexico?
Well, I'm trying to put it together. I suppose I've gotten a call just the other day to speak to Miguel Suarez, who obviously was the last person to see him alive.
Wow, okay.
That knew him.
Now explain
Mr. Suarez is one of the founders and head of an organization called RUMEC. RUMEC is a California-based, I think it's in San Jose, California, and they're concerned mostly with civil and human rights for workers in the construction industry. And they put together this organization.
Okay.
And young Malcolm, the story begins with him, a friend approaching him and asking Malcolm to make a call and help him out in his burgeoning career as a rapper and a singer. And according to one story I read, Malcolm picked up the phone, took his cell phone, and made a call to California, and just like that, arrangements was made for him to fly out to California and speak up for this young man to get him a recording contract. Apparently what happened, he goes to California, he spends some time in L.A., and then since he's so close to some other friends of his, he just say, okay, I'll just go on down to Mexico City and see
so this
Miguel.
This wasn't prepared. I mean, he wasn't...
It was just kind of like, I don't know to what extent it was arranged or anything, but he took advantage of being out there on the West Coast. The next thing you know, we start hearing rumors that, first of all, that he had been shot and killed in Tijuana.
Right.
Then it was changed. It said, no, he was thrown off of a roof there.
Right.
And then finally we got the story that he had been beaten in Mexico City. All of this was done. Terry Williams, with her book Black Pain, she's very close to the family, and I was getting my information. And we were at the Amsterdam News getting information from her. And then all of us started calling the State Department and the ambassador and the consulate down there to see if we can get information. All they told us is that, yes, a U.S. citizen had been killed in Mexico City, but they couldn't divulge any more information. All they knew was they didn't tell you who it was, what color it was, nothing. They just said, yes, a U.S. citizen has been killed in Mexico City. And so it took another whole news cycle before we got a better understanding, and then it was coming from Miguel Suarez and one of his friends, Juan Rodriguez or something, and they put it out on their website about what had happened. He was down there to see them. Miguel had been deported from this country. They were close friends. He was going down there to add some credibility, whatever name he could lend to that organization, to give it to bolster its impact. He wanted to put his influence on the particular organization, and that's why he was in Mexico City. So I guess Miguel took him out, I guess was showing him around and everything, but he took him to a section there where it's supposed to be very dangerous, and it was heavily, it's a prostitution and all that kind of stuff. And they went off into this bar, and the next thing you know, they got a bill, a $1,200 bill. You know, just for having a few drinks and talking to some women there. But they say, you don't talk to the women down there without paying a cost. And so they kind of like was disputing, I mean, $1,200 bill. They began to dispute that. One word led to another. A gun was put to Miguel's head. He was taken away. And apparently they jumped Malcolm and started beating him savagely. Miguel was taken away, but some kind of way he broke away from whoever had abducted him and got back in time to see Malcolm having been beaten within an inch of his life. So the ambulance was called and everything, and they rushed him to the hospital, but apparently, according to reports, he died on his way to the hospital. And then the whole question turns like, you know, hey, they've arrested 2 people out there who was connected with the beating, and we're trying to get a handle on that. They had his funeral. They had Malcolm's funeral in California, in Oakland, California. So that's where his mother is, apparently. She lives there in Oakland, California.
Anybody that knows anything about Mexico knows that you don't go to Mexico by yourself.
Yes.
I mean, with this relationship with this Miguel?
Yes.
That tight, that he felt that secure?
I guess he felt confident that that would be okay. But Miguel may not have been.
Miguel.
Or you have to understand that, you know, he's a California-based person down in Mexico City himself. So he may not have been as aware of where he was going as anyone else. Right. You know, so he thought, hey, we can go out and have some fun.
So these some rich Americans who they're trying to rip off.
Yeah, he digging.
If Malcolm made Hajj as a Muslim,
what is he doing down there?
Why are you there in a bar?
Yes.
When you, as a Muslim, don't drink alcohol. And I can't see Miguel taking him to a place like that if he really knows Malcolm. That's like taking a Jew to a barbecue pit.
Yeah, right, yeah.
There's something wrong with this guy, Miguel. You don't take your friend, out of respect, you don't take your friend to a place like that.
With hookers.
It's a lot of...
To have a drink.
It's true. It's a lot of unanswered questions. The whole conspiratorial aspects come into play. Here's young Malcolm, who's moving in an international circle. He's in Mexico City. You know, this is not in Toledo or Detroit.
Tijuana.
This is Mexico City. Where were you before? Well, I spent a year in Syria. And you, what? You're talking about going to Iran. You know, you made the Hajj to Mecca.
What about CIA and FBI?
So that's what I'm saying. That's where the conspiracy theories come into play, is that they're going to nip this here young Malcolm in the bud. Because we know how the FBI and the CIA was surveilling his grandfather.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. In fact, in the book we have coming out, we think we've nailed, Ilyas and I think we've nailed who that CIA agent was who was shadowing the spook who was on Malcolm's trail in Africa and the Middle East. That's one of the things we divulge in the book.
Wasn't that in Make It Plain? Wasn't it? Not Make It Plain.
They have never, no one has read the diaries as well as we have.
Okay.
Because this is Malcolm's diary.
Okay.
That he kept during his trips to, in 1964, he made 2 trips to the Middle East and Africa. He kept a meticulous, copious notes that he kept.
Really?
And it's now at the Schomburg.
Okay.
And that's a whole nother story in terms of how that diary ended up at the Schomburg. And that's when, because one of the daughters put the stuff in storage down in Florida.
Okay.
And then the bill came due, and they could not pay it. The stuff was auctioned off. A man named James Calhoun down in Florida, he bought the whole pig in the poke and discovered he had a treasure trove.
Wow.
So then he got in touch with Butterfield, and Butterfield's out in San Francisco, the major auction house. Yeah. Let's put the stuff on eBay, and it went up.
Of course.
And then, but Joe Fleming, the late Joe Fleming, who was the attorney for the family, interceded and got a court injunction and stopped the sale of that stuff, and it reverted back to the family.
Okay.
And it came back to New York, to the Schomburg, right? Howard Dotson then was the curator. And he called me up, James Gilbert, who was the late James Gilbert. We went over to the Schomburg, and we were there when they opened up these 2 big crates that came in. Winston, man, you know, you have not seen, Malcolm was a pack rat. And I can attest to that. I know something about being a pack rat.
You mean they would have had a show on him?
I mean, he kept everything. Bills and receipts. And all of that stuff is part of that collection at the Schomburg.
I gotta see
I've gone through just about all of it. And one of the things that captured me when I was over there with Mr. Gilbert, after Howard called, I said, I want to get to that diary one day.
Yeah, of course.
And it took several years for them to catalog and prepare that stuff for scholars to come in. Manning Marable sent some of his people over there. But they didn't do a thorough look at that diary. They were looking for particular things.
What do you think about his
book?
What do you think about his book, Marable?
Well, we put out an answer to that.
Okay. In your book?
The one before, last year.
Okay.
By Any Means Necessary.
Okay.
It's called By Any Means Necessary's Malcolm X Real, Not Reinvented.
Okay.
Because one of the concerns we had with Manning's work, and Manning was very close to me over the years.
Okay.
I mean, I met him way back when he first got his PhD. And I was teaching at the University of Iowa, and I went down to Fisk University because he headed up the Race Institute there. He invited, I just come back from Africa. He invited me to be on a panel, and I met Manning. And I knew that he was a scholar, a budding, very promising scholar. And he established a solid track record. But he got up to that, and a lot of people try to attribute it to his illness and everything, that he didn't get a chance to fine-tune that project.
Okay.
Of course, he was really sick toward the end.
Yeah, he died. How long
he
after?
died 3 days before the book came out. It's kind of like, whoa, what is that all about? On April Fool's Day.
Yeah,
he was gone, and he left behind like a very, very powerful legacy of work, including how capitalism underdeveloped Black America. I think I use that in my classroom even today, you know. But we took exception to that reinvention. We took exception to the kind of pursuit and on the whole homosexual allegation. Yeah. We took exception to the philandering assertions that he made. So we had some problems with that book, the whole scholarship with it. So I pulled together Hakeem Al-Dabuti, Dr. Maulana Karenga, and Dr. Ron Daniels, and we put together this collection of responses, some positive, some negative, most of them negative. And that was a book. People like Imam Talib Abdul Rashid has a piece in there. Mumia Abu Jamal has a piece in there. Michael Eric, I mean, you know, across the board, we have all kind of people in the book. So that was our response to it, and we took exception to some of the conclusions that he had, as well as, but I think the diary that's coming out complements the autobiography in so many important ways, and that should be out in days now. It should be out within days, and certainly you and Graham, y'all be in a position to get copies right away, and then read it over and let's talk about it. Particularly Graham, in terms of your understanding of the FBI and the CIA. See if we're on the right track. See if we're on the right track.
Even the issue now. Years ago, they were wiretapping our phones in 100 blacks. Verizon. Today, Verizon is tapping people's phones for the NSA. All right? You have to look at the continuous MO of the government. Going back to the 60s, J. Edgar Hoover. He violated federal law more times than anybody in the history of the country. And he did it with impunity. Right now, a guy chasing that record is Ray Kelly. No, Ray Kelly has to have caught him because stop and frisk, each violation, he's caught him.
No doubt about it.
With their monitoring, they were trying to get Martin to commit suicide.
Right, they just brought that out.
You know?
It's recent.
And this stuff is not new. There's a satellite called the Predator satellite that they've been using for years, before Obama and before Bush, to monitor telephone calls. You get the technology, but you get it late. You find out about it late. You see, so it's going to be interesting to see, and what concerns might the government have had with regard to Malcolm X.
You know, we got about 2 minutes left. I want to get back to Mexico and the assertion that this Miguel is co-conspirator. Is any possibilities, or do you see any light in that?
That's kind of an easy conclusion. That's an easy way to move. That's a very easy. But you know, when you go in that direction, I almost err on the side of caution when it comes to that, because you can be overzealous, you can overreach in such a way that you distort the reality. That so often happens. We were together Saturday, weren't we, at the National Action Network, and we heard Reverend Sharpton say something very interesting about conspiracy theories, didn't he? You know, sometimes all you do is stick to the truth, as much as you understand that truth. And sometimes all these theories get out there, and you get confused about the reality. So we have to begin to search for the truth. And Malcolm was all about, both Malcolms as far as I'm concerned.
So what you're trying to say,
search for the truth.
It might be something as simple as they were the wrong place at the wrong time.
Place, wrong time, you know, who knows about that? And even if you got to that, there's very little you can do. I mean, we're trying to work on his great-grandfather, Earl Little. They've never solved that.
We know
Malcolm thing is still up in the air in so many respects, you know.
Well,
and here we have something down in Mexico. How seriously are they going to pursue this?
Oh,
you think they'll pursue it seriously, Graham?
No.
It might be something as simple as he was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It could be just that. And just what can we say about it? We lost a very promising young man. He seemed to be in a mood and an attitude to turn his whole life around and to make a contribution just like his grandfather.
Well, this closing piece is Malcolm, December 1964 in Europe.
Yes.
And we're going to see the end of his time just before his death. Run that piece now, and we'll come back right after. We might have 10 seconds on. Well, if we don't, I'll just say the God in me loves the God in you, and thank you for coming today.
It's a pleasure.
And it's always a pleasure. We're gonna have to have you back.
Oh yeah, we come back.
We're just starting.
When that book is done,
we'll come out. We'll be right back here.
The conversation. All right, let's go to that piece. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
In December 1964, Malcolm debated at the Oxford Union in England.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.